He had been walking through the quiet hallways of the office building for years, pushing a mop and carrying a bucket, always careful not to make a sound that would disturb the workers. Most people in the building didn't even notice him. They passed him in the hallways, barely acknowledging his presence. He was the kind of man who worked at night when the office was empty, the janitor everyone overlooked. People saw the uniform, the bucket, and the mop, but they never saw him. He moved with a steady rhythm, sweeping the floors and wiping the tables. Always focused on doing his job well, even if nobody noticed. He liked the quiet. The silence of the empty office was comforting to him. It gave him space to think, to remember, and sometimes to dream. Each night, after finishing his cleaning, he would pause near the old piano in the lobby. The piano had been there for decades, its keys yellowed with age, the wood scratched and worn. No one ever played it anymore. It was a piece of furniture, a decoration, something that nobody used. But to him it was different. He remembered a time when pianos were not just furniture, and music was the center of his life. As he looked at the piano, his fingers would twitch. Sometimes, just for a moment, he imagined himself sitting on the small bench, pressing the keys, letting the music flow. He remembered the lessons he had taken long ago. The hours spent practicing scales and melodies, the sound of Chopin filling a small room, turning everything around him into something magical. Those memories were both beautiful and painful. They reminded him of what he had once had and what he had lost. He was not a young man anymore, but his hands were steady. His movements were careful and precise. There was a kind of grace in the way he carried himself, a subtle rhythm in the way he moved. He had learned over the years to make his work almost invisible, to do it without disturbing anyone. People often thought that being a janitor was simple work, just mopping floors and emptying trash cans, but he knew it was more than that. There was an art to cleaning, a rhythm, a flow, a sense of order and care that made a place feel alive rather than empty. He took pride in that. Sometimes when he passed an office with the lights still on, he could hear people talking, laughing, complaining, or celebrating. He liked to listen from a distance, unseen, just to feel a connection to the lives inside. He had learned not to intrude, not to ask questions, not to draw attention to himself. There was safety in being invisible. There was freedom in it too, in a way. He could move through the world without people noticing, without judgment, without expectation. But that freedom also carried loneliness. Most nights, after everyone left, he would sit on a small chair in a corner, looking at the empty offices, the silent desks, and the dim lights. He would remember the piano, and a strange warmth would spread through him. Music had always been his companion, even when no one else cared. He remembered the first time he had touched a piano. He was very young, maybe 6 or 7 years old. He had been fascinated by the black and white keys, by the way pressing them could create sound, melody, and emotion. He had begged his parents for lessons, and for a while they had said yes. He had a teacher who was strict but patient, who had encouraged him to practice every day, to push his limits, and to feel the music rather than just play it. He had fallen in love with Chopin early on. There was something about the music, the way it could be both delicate and powerful, that spoke to him like nothing else. He practiced for hours, learning every note, every nuance, every subtle shift in tone. Music was his world, his escape, his home. But life had other plans. His family struggled financially, and when he was a teenager, he had to give up the piano lessons. The instrument that had been his closest friend became a distant memory. The teacher could not continue, and his parents could not afford the lessons. He was heartbroken, but he learned to adapt. He worked hard, taking odd jobs, helping his family, trying to survive. The piano became a dream put on hold, a treasure locked away in his heart. He told himself that one day he would return to it, that one day he would play again. Years passed. He moved from city to city, job to job, always taking work that would allow him to survive. He never stopped loving music, but he never found a place where he could play again. Sometimes in the quiet of his apartment at night, he would hum melodies, tapping his fingers on the table, imagining the sound of the piano beneath them. It was not enough, but it kept the dream alive. It kept his heart beating with hope. Then one day he got the job at this corporate building. It was nothing glamorous, nothing that anyone would envy, but it was steady work. He learned the routines, the schedules, the secret corners of the building that needed cleaning. He became invisible. People passed him without a thought. Some ignored him, some were annoyed by him, some were polite but distant. None of them suspected that the quiet man who pushed the mop was someone who once knew the touch of a piano, as if it were part of his soul. He liked the nights best, when the building was empty, when he could move through the halls without interruption. He would sometimes hum Chopin's melodies softly, just enough for himself. The sound would echo in the empty offices, bouncing off walls and desks, and it would make him smile. He felt connected to the past, to the music that had shaped him, to the person he had once been. Music reminded him that he was more than just a janitor, more than the uniform he wore, more than the mop and bucket. Music reminded him that he still had a soul full of dreams. One night, he paused at the piano in the lobby, as he had done many times before. He ran his fingers lightly over the keys, feeling the cool wood beneath his fingertips. He remembered the first time he had touched a piano, the thrill of creating sound, the joy of learning, the pride of mastering a piece. He imagined the notes flowing beneath his hands, and for a moment he was no longer a janitor. He was the boy who had fallen in love with Chopin, the student who had practiced for hours, the musician who had dreamed of a life filled with music. He began to play softly, hesitantly at first. The notes were careful, deliberate, almost timid, but soon they began to flow. The melody of a Chopin nocturne filled the empty lobby, delicate and gentle at first, then stronger, more confident. The music carried emotion, sadness, hope, and longing. It was a voice that spoke without words, a story told through the touch of his fingers on the keys. He closed his eyes, letting the music guide him, letting it bring him back to a world he had long missed. In that moment, he felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. The building, the empty offices, the fluorescent lights, all of it faded away. There was only the piano and the music, and him. He was no longer invisible. He was not just a janitor. He was a man who could create something beautiful, something that could touch hearts, something that reminded the world, even if just for a moment, of what was possible when passion and talent meet. Sometimes he imagined someone listening, someone who could recognize the depth of what he was doing. He imagined the surprise on a face, the realization that a man like him could play with such skill and feeling. He imagined the world noticing him, finally seeing not just the uniform, but the person beneath it. But he did not play for recognition. He played for himself, for the memory, for the joy, and for the connection to something greater than the night, the building and the quiet routine of his life. Night after night, he returned to the piano after finishing his cleaning. He played softly at first, then with more confidence, and sometimes with pure emotion, letting the music carry him away. He remembered the past and allowed himself to dream about the future. The piano became his companion, his confidant, his friend. It was a place where he could be himself, where the world could not judge him, where the music could speak what words could not. Little did he know that his quiet nights, his hidden talent, and his years of practice were about to intersect with a life far above his own. Someone in the building would notice, in the world he had kept separate from the uniform. The mop in the night shifts was about to collide with something unexpected. For now, though, he was alone, playing Chopin for the empty lobby. Feeling alive in the silence, dreaming of a moment that he did not yet know was coming, his fingers danced on the keys, weaving a story of passion, loss, and hope, a story that had been waiting for years to be told. The janitor and the piano were alone together, and in that quiet, the music became a bridge between his past and the possibility of something extraordinary. The janitor's nights were quiet, but the quiet had a rhythm of its own. Every sound, every echo, every small creak of the floorboards felt familiar to him. He moved through the building like it was his own world, even though no one seemed to notice him. The routine was simple. Clean the offices, empty the trash, sweep the floors, and check the bathrooms. Then he would pause by the piano, letting his fingers brush over the keys. But lately, he found himself staying longer, playing the piano after he finished his work. He remembered the past as he pressed the keys, imagining the music filling the entire building. He had kept this secret for years. The office workers knew him only as the quiet janitor, a man who did his job and nothing more. They had no idea that under the uniform and the mop was someone who had spent his life with music. Music had been a part of him long before he had put on this uniform. He remembered the days of lessons, of recitals, of sitting at a piano and feeling the world fade away as he played. That world had been taken from him by circumstances he could not control. He had adapted, survived, and continued to dream in the quiet moments. One evening, he arrived at the building earlier than usual. The sun had set, and the office was almost empty. Most employees had gone home, leaving only a few cleaning crews and late workers. He carried his bucket and mop, moving slowly through the hallways. The smell of polish and cleaning fluid filled the air, mixing with the faint scent of coffee left in forgotten cups. He went about his work as usual, methodical and careful, making sure everything was spotless. The rhythm of his work was comforting. He enjoyed the process, a sense of accomplishment in seeing the building clean and orderly. But there was a tug in his heart tonight, feeling that something was different. Maybe it was the way the light fell on the piano in the lobby, highlighting the worn wood and yellowed keys. Maybe it was the silence deeper than usual that made him aware of the empty space around him. Whatever it was, he found himself walking toward the piano with a purpose he had not felt before. He paused in front of it, taking a deep breath. His fingers hovered over the keys, remembering the shapes, the sounds, the feeling of music flowing through him. He pressed a key lightly, then another, and the first soft notes of Chopin filled the lobby. The sound was delicate at first, almost shy, but it grew in confidence as he continued. Each note carried emotion, a mixture of sadness, hope, and longing. He closed his eyes and let the music take over, letting his fingers move as if they had a life of their own. The janitor was no longer just a man cleaning floors. He was a musician, a storyteller, a man who could speak without words through the touch of his fingers. He remembered the hours of practice, the lessons, the recitals that never happened, the applause that never came. All of it flowed through him now, expressed in the music that filled the empty lobby. Little did he know, someone was listening. One of the late-night employees, a young assistant who had stayed behind to finish reports, paused as the soft melodic notes reached her ears. She stood quietly at the top of the stairs, unsure of what she was hearing. The sound was so beautiful, so unexpected that she could not move. She had never known the janitor to be anything more than a man who cleaned floors and emptied trash. And yet, here was a man, hidden in plain sight, creating music that was both tender and powerful. She wanted to call out to get someone to hear this, but she stayed silent, afraid of breaking the spell. The janitor continued to play, lost in the music, unaware of the listener. His mind drifted to memories of his youth, of a small room with a piano that had once been his whole world. He remembered his teacher, patient and strict, who had taught him to feel the music rather than just play the notes. He remembered the first time he had played a Chopin nocturne perfectly, the pride and joy he had felt. And then he remembered the pain of having to give it up, the dream put aside to survive. But now, in the quiet of the office building, that dream was alive again, if only for a few moments as the melody continued. The assistant could see the intensity in his face, the concentration in his eyes, the way his hands moved with a precision that spoke of years of training. The janitor was a master of his craft, and yet he played with a humility that made the music even more moving. She could feel the emotion in every note, the story he was telling without words. She realized that this was not just music. This was a lifetime of passion, practice, loss, and hope, all poured into the sound of the piano. The janitor finished the piece, his hands resting gently on the keys, a small smile on his face. The lobby was silent, filled with the echoes of the music that had just been played. He did not look up, did not acknowledge the assistant standing silently on the stairs. He simply took a deep breath, feeling a sense of fulfillment that he had not felt in years. For him, this was enough. The music had been played, the dream had been realized, even if only in this quiet, empty space. The assistant, moved by what she had just witnessed, finally found her voice. She whispered a quiet, "That was amazing." The janitor looked up, surprised, his eyes meeting hers. There was no arrogance, no pride, just a gentle acknowledgement. He nodded and smiled, returning to his work as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But the assistant knew she had witnessed something extraordinary. She had seen a hidden talent, a secret world that existed beneath the uniform and the mop. She understood that this man was not defined by his job, but by the passion and skill he had carried with him all these years. In the days that followed, small changes began to happen. The assistant could not forget the music, and she told a few trusted colleagues about what she had heard. The story spread quietly, whispered among those who had stayed late or passed through the lobby after hours. People began to notice the janitor in a new light. He was still quiet, still methodical, still invisible to most, but those who had heard him play saw him differently. They saw a man with a past, with talent, with depth. A man who had carried a secret for years and finally let it shine in the quiet of the night. The janitor, for his part, continued his work as usual. He did not seek recognition, did not ask for attention. He played when he could, for the love of the music, for the memories, for the feeling of being alive. The piano became his sanctuary, a place where he could express himself without judgment, where the world could not impose limits on him. Each night, as he cleaned the building, he would feel the pull of the keys, the call of the music, and he would play. It was a ritual, a bridge between his past and his present, a reminder that he was more than just a janitor. The building itself seemed to respond to the music. The empty halls felt warmer, the desks and chairs seemed to breathe with life, and even the fluorescent lights seemed to shine a little brighter. The janitor felt a connection to the space, a sense that he belonged, not just as a worker, but as someone who could bring beauty and emotion into the world around him. Music had given him this connection, and he cherished it more than anything. One night, after playing a particularly emotional piece, he paused and looked around the lobby. The piano seemed to shine in the dim light, its worn keys glowing with a kind of magic. He realized that he had kept this secret for too long, that the world might never see his talent if he continued to hide. But the thought of revealing himself was frightening. He had built his life on invisibility, on quiet survival, and stepping into the light seemed impossible. Yet the music inside him was growing stronger, demanding to be heard, and he knew that change was coming. Whether he wanted it or not, he did not know when or how. But he felt that one day, someone important would notice. Someone who could understand the depth of his talent, someone who could see beyond the uniform and the mop. He played with that hope in mind, letting each note carry a message, a story, a piece of his soul. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a voice, a bridge, a key to a world he had longed to return to. And as he played, he felt the anticipation building, the quiet thrill of knowing that one day, the world might finally listen. The janitor's nights had begun to feel different. There was a quiet excitement in the air, a sense that something was about to happen. He went about his cleaning as always, moving through the empty hallways with his mop and bucket, methodical and precise. But when he reached the lobby, the piano seemed to call him more strongly than ever. He paused, fingers hovering above the keys, feeling the weight of the music waiting to be released. It had been years since he had played so freely, without restraint, without worry. Tonight, something felt like it could change. As he began to play, the familiar notes of Chopin filled the empty lobby. The sound was soft at first, delicate and careful, but as he lost himself in the music, it grew more powerful. He remembered his past, the hours spent practicing, the small victories, the moments of pure joy that music had given him. Each note was a connection to the boy he had once been, the dreams he had carried, the life he had imagined. He closed his eyes, letting the piano speak for him, letting the music tell the story that words could not, unknown to him. A late-night executive had stayed behind in his office, finishing some last-minute paperwork. He had heard the music floating down the hall, and curious, had followed the sound to the lobby. From the doorway he watched, unsure of what he was seeing. The janitor, the quiet man who usually moved like a shadow through the building, was seated at the piano, his fingers moving with precision and grace. The notes of Chopin's nocturne flowed through the room, filling the space with beauty and emotion. The executive felt a lump in his throat as he listened, unable to tear his eyes away. He had expected to find an empty lobby, maybe a cleaning cart, but what he found was extraordinary. The janitor did not notice the executive at first. He was lost in the music, each note carrying years of passion, sorrow, and hope. He had played this piece countless times in his mind, but never with an audience. The familiarity of the melody gave him confidence, but the emotion in the music was entirely new. He let the feelings he had kept buried for so long flow freely through his fingers. The lobby seemed to breathe with him, the lights softening, the shadows dancing. As if the building itself recognized the importance of the moment, the executive felt a mix of awe and disbelief. How could someone like this, a janitor, play with such skill, such depth? It was impossible and yet undeniable. Every note was clear, every pause meaningful, every crescendo building toward something magnificent. The music spoke to him in a way he had not expected. It was not just entertainment. It was an expression of a life lived in quiet determination, of talent hidden in plain sight, of a soul yearning to be heard. He could feel the story behind the music, the struggle, the dreams, the lost years, and it moved him profoundly. The janitor, still unaware of the audience, shifted slightly on the bench, adjusting his posture, letting the music flow more freely. Memories of his past washed over him. He remembered the first recital he had ever played in, the applause, the encouragement, the sense of being alive. He remembered the day he had to give up lessons, the disappointment, the silence that followed. He remembered the piano at home, the notes he had played alone, the dreams he had held close to his chest. All of it was alive again now, brought back by the touch of his fingers. By the sound of the notes filling the lobby, the executive stepped closer, unsure whether he should interrupt. He had seen many talented people in his life, but this was different. There was no pretense, no showmanship, no expectation of recognition. The janitor played for the music, for the feeling, for the connection to something greater than himself. The purity of it struck the executive deeply. He realized that he was witnessing something rare, something that could not be replicated or taught. This was talent in its most authentic form. A lifetime of skill and emotion condensed into a few minutes of music. As the piece reached its climax, the janitor's hands flew over the keys. Precise yet expressive, powerful yet tender. The notes seemed to resonate in the very walls of the building, vibrating through the air and into the hearts of anyone who could hear. The executive felt tears welling up in his eyes, a rare reaction for a man who prided himself on composure and control. He had never expected to be moved in this way in an office building, watching a janitor play an old piano late at night. The music broke through all barriers, all assumptions, all expectations. The final note lingered in the air, fading slowly into silence. The janitor's hands rested gently on the keys, his eyes closed, a small, satisfied smile on his face. He had played with everything he had, and the music had responded. The lobby was still, except for the faint echo of the last note, and for the first time in years, the janitor felt complete. The moment was perfect, fragile, and beautiful, and he savored it without knowing that it had changed something in the world. Outside his own mind, the executive stepped forward, clearing his throat softly. The sound made the janitor open his eyes, startled. He looked up, expecting to see another late-night worker, maybe someone curious or a security guard. Instead, he saw the executive standing there, eyes wide, a mixture of surprise and admiration on his face. The janitor's heart skipped a beat, but he did not panic. He was used to being unnoticed, and this sudden attention was unfamiliar. Still, there was something about the way the executive looked at him that felt different, something that suggested understanding rather than judgment. "That was incredible," the executive said quietly. "I had no idea you could play like that." The janitor blinked, unsure how to respond. Compliments were rare, and recognition even rarer. He shrugged slightly, not wanting to make a fuss. "I've played for years," he said simply. "Just for myself?" The executive shook his head, a smile spreading across his face. For yourself? That was beyond anything I've ever heard. You should be performing for more than just yourself. You have real talent." The janitor felt a mixture of pride and humility. He had never sought attention or recognition, but the words stirred something inside him. For the first time in years, he considered the possibility that his music could matter to someone else, that it could reach beyond the walls of this building. He had lived in quiet, invisible existence for so long, and now he was confronted with the idea that the world might see him differently. Over the next few nights, the executive made it a point to stay in the building longer, listening whenever the janitor played. He watched the subtle changes in the janitor's demeanor, the way his body relaxed when he played, the way his eyes closed and his fingers danced across the keys. The executive began to understand the depth of the man's talent, and he realized that it was a rare gift, one that deserved more than a quiet lobby and empty offices. He began to consider what could be done, how this hidden brilliance could be recognized and nurtured. The janitor continued his routine, unaware of the growing admiration around him. He cleaned, he played, he hummed melodies as he worked, always finding comfort in the music. Yet a quiet hope had begun to take root. He felt that someone had seen him, truly seen him, for the first time in years. It was a small seed of possibility, but it grew stronger each night as he played, as the executive listened, as the music filled the building with life. One evening, the executive spoke to him directly, sitting across from the piano as the janitor finished cleaning. "I want to hear more," he said. "There's something about the way you play, something that can't be taught. You have a gift, and it's time the world knew about it." The janitor felt a flutter of nerves and excitement. He had never imagined that anyone would care about his talent, let alone someone so high up in the company. Yet, there was a sincerity in the executive's voice, a belief in him that he had almost forgotten he deserved. He nodded slowly, a mixture of humility and anticipation. The piano had been his secret for so long, and now, finally, he was being invited to share it. The executive smiled. "Tomorrow, we'll arrange something. Just a small demonstration. I want a few people to hear what you can do. It's time for others to see what I've seen." The janitor felt a mixture of fear and excitement. He had lived in quiet for so long that stepping into the light seemed impossible. Yet, the music had always been his companion, and now it had given him courage. He realized that for the first time in years, he was about to take a step into a world that had seemed closed off, a world that might finally recognize his talent, his story, and the years of dedication hidden behind the uniform of a janitor. The janitor had always kept to the shadows, but now the shadows were shrinking. Word of his talent had quietly spread, and the atmosphere in the building began to feel different. Nights that had once been simply about cleaning and routine now carried a sense of expectation. Even though he moved silently through the hallways, he felt eyes upon him, not with judgment, but with curiosity, admiration and anticipation. It was a feeling he had never experienced before. It filled him with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. That evening, the building was quieter than usual. The few remaining workers had left for the day, leaving only a handful of people finishing up tasks in their offices. The janitor moved through the corridors, as always, careful not to make a sound that would disturb anyone. Yet, when he reached the lobby and glanced at the piano, he felt a pull stronger than ever before. The keys seemed to call to him, urging him to play, urging him to let the music flow. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, then allowed his fingers to dance lightly over the keys. The first notes were gentle, almost hesitant. He had not played in front of anyone yet, only for himself and the occasional nighttime listener. But tonight was different. He had been asked to play for the executive, to demonstrate his skill to someone who could truly understand it. The pressure was new, and yet there was also a quiet thrill in it. He closed his eyes, letting the music take over, letting the years of training, practice, and longing guide his hands as he played. The notes filled the lobby, rich and full of emotion. Each chord, each gentle shift in tempo carried a story of his life, his dreams, his sacrifices, his hidden talents. The executive stood quietly nearby, listening intently, his face calm but his eyes wide with awe. The music was more than just sound. It was a revelation, a window into a life that had been invisible for so long. He felt honored and almost breathless, knowing he was witnessing something extraordinary. Suddenly, the elevator doors opened, and a presence entered the lobby. The janitor, still absorbed in the music, did not notice at first. The sound of footsteps approaching was gentle, almost cautious, but there was a subtle weight to them, an authority that made the air feel heavier. He sensed it instinctively, but he did not stop playing. The piano had always been a safe space, a place where he could express himself fully without fear, and tonight was no different. The music poured out of him, and the presence in the room seemed to respond to it. The CEO stepped into the lobby, a tall figure in a crisp suit, carrying the weight of responsibility and authority. He had been working late, unaware of the events unfolding in the quiet spaces of his building. The music reached his ears first, soft and distant at first, then growing louder, more commanding. He paused, letting the sound guide him toward its source. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. There, seated at the piano, was the janitor, a man who until now had been almost invisible, playing with a skill and passion that was breathtaking. The CEO stood quietly, watching without interrupting. He had seen talent before, he had seen performers and musicians, but this was different. There was no stage, no audience, no preparation. Just a man expressing himself fully, purely, and beautifully. The notes filled the room, resonating with emotion. And the CEO felt a rare stirring of something he had almost forgotten. He had never expected to encounter such raw, unfiltered talent in the lobby of his office building. In a man whose job was to clean floors and empty trash, the janitor's hands moved over the keys with precision and grace. He was lost in the music, his eyes closed, his body swaying slightly with the rhythm. He had not played with anyone watching before, and yet there was no hesitation, no faltering. The music flowed naturally, effortlessly, like water moving through a stream. It told a story of years hidden, of dreams deferred, of a life full of passion waiting to be recognized. The CEO, standing silently, understood this without words. He could feel the depth of the man's journey, the dedication behind every note, and he was profoundly moved. The executive stepped aside slightly, allowing the CEO to experience the music fully. He had wanted to arrange this meeting carefully, to give the janitor a chance to shine without feeling pressure, and it seemed to be working perfectly. The janitor played with a vulnerability that was rare in performers, with a strength born of years of practice and longing. The CEO felt a connection to the music, an understanding of the story being told without words. It was as if the piano itself was speaking directly to him, revealing the hidden life of a man who had been overlooked for too long. When the piece reached its crescendo, the janitor's fingers flew over the keys. Strong and confident, yet delicate and precise, the notes seemed to echo in every corner of the lobby, vibrating through the floor and walls, filling the space with a sense of presence and life. The CEO felt tears prick his eyes, an unusual response for a man accustomed to controlling every aspect of his environment. He was witnessing something rare, something pure and human, and it touched him deeply. The music was more than entertainment. It was an expression of the soul, a story told with honesty and emotion. The final note lingered in the air, fading slowly into silence. The janitor rested his hands gently on the keys, breathing deeply, a small, serene smile on his face. He had given everything he had, and the music had responded. The lobby was still, except for the faint echoes of the last note. And for the first time in years, the janitor felt a sense of completion, a feeling that he had shared a part of himself that had long remained hidden. The CEO stepped forward, breaking the silence with a quiet, almost reverent voice. "That was extraordinary," he said. "I had no idea." The janitor looked up, meeting the CEO's gaze for the first time. There was a moment of hesitation, a flicker of nervousness, but he remained calm. "I've played for years," he said simply. "Mostly for myself." The CEO shook his head slowly, still in awe. "For yourself?" This was incredible. "You have a gift that should be shared, not hidden in silence." "I've never seen anything like this." The janitor felt a mix of pride and humility. He had lived most of his life without recognition, and the words stirred something deep inside him. He realized that the music had not only been for him, but had the power to move others, to touch lives. And now, someone in a position to make a difference had witnessed it firsthand. The CEO smiled, a warmth in his eyes that the janitor had never seen before. "I want to make sure people know about your talent. We should arrange a small demonstration, something private to start. You deserve to be recognized for what you can do." The janitor felt a mixture of excitement and fear. He had spent decades in quiet, invisible work. The thought of stepping into the light was both thrilling and intimidating. But he knew the music had led him here, and for the first time, he considered the possibility that his talent could matter to others, that it could change the course of his life. Over the next few days, arrangements were made. The janitor continued his routine, cleaning and playing, but now with a quiet anticipation. He practiced with a renewed focus, preparing for the demonstration. The executive and CEO discussed the plan carefully, ensuring that the moment would honor the janitor's skill and dedication. The man himself felt a growing sense of courage, a readiness to reveal what had been hidden for so long. The lobby, once a place of routine and emptiness, had transformed into a stage of opportunity. The janitor approached the piano with a mixture of familiarity and new purpose. Each key he pressed carried not just the music, but the weight of years of perseverance. The story of a life lived quietly yet passionately. He knew that the upcoming demonstration could change everything, and he felt ready to embrace it. When the evening of the demonstration arrived, the janitor seated himself at the piano, fingers poised over the keys. The CEO and a few carefully selected colleagues watched, eager yet respectful, understanding the gravity of the moment. The janitor took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and began to play. The music flowed effortlessly, rich with emotion, telling a story of hidden talent, lost years, and finally hope. The notes filled the room, carrying the weight of his journey and the promise of recognition. And everyone present understood that they were witnessing something rare, beautiful, and profoundly human. The night of the demonstration had finally arrived, and the janitor felt a nervous excitement he had not experienced in decades. The building, usually quiet and empty at night, now held a sense of anticipation that seemed almost tangible. The CEO and a small group of carefully selected colleagues were gathered in the lobby, standing quietly to give him space. The piano sat in its usual place, worn but beautiful, a silent witness to the countless nights of practice and passion. The janitor took a deep breath, allowing himself a moment to remember why he had started playing in the first place, the joy, the escape, the expression of something inside him that words could never capture. He approached the piano, feeling the familiar texture of the keys beneath his fingers. For a moment he hesitated, wondering if he could meet the expectations of the audience before him. But then he remembered the countless nights when the building was empty, when the music had flowed freely, without judgment. This was not so different, he realized, except now there were eyes to see and ears to hear. He seated himself, adjusted the small bench, and let his fingers hover over the keys. Then, with a deep exhale, he began to play. The first notes were soft, delicate, tentative, as if testing the waters. Then, as his confidence grew, the music began to flow naturally, effortlessly, carrying with it a depth of emotion that filled the room. Each chord, each subtle shift in tempo, spoke of years of dedication, of dreams deferred, of a hidden life finally being acknowledged. The CEO and his colleagues watched in silence, captivated by the beauty and precision of the performance. It was more than music. It was a story of resilience, of passion, and of hope. As the janitor's hands danced across the keys, memories of his youth flooded back. He remembered the small room where he had first learned to play, the joy of mastering a challenging piece, the pride of performing in front of his teacher. He remembered the disappointment of having to give up lessons, the weight of responsibility pressing him into a life far from the music he loved. But now, in this moment, he felt a sense of liberation. The music was not just a memory. It was alive, flowing through him. Reaching the hearts of everyone in the room, the executives leaned forward slightly, caught up in the emotion of the performance. The music was powerful, yet tender, precise yet expressive. Each note seemed to carry a piece of the janitor's soul, a story that had been hidden for too long. The CEO, a man used to control and order, felt something stirring within him that he had not felt in years. It was admiration, awe, and a deep respect for the man who had lived quietly, unnoticed, and yet had cultivated a talent that was nothing short of extraordinary. As the performance continued, the janitor lost himself completely in the music. He was no longer the man who cleaned floors and emptied trash. He was the musician he had always dreamed of being, the artist who had nurtured a love for Chopin through decades of silence. The music seemed to fill every corner of the lobby, echoing off the walls, resonating in the hearts of those who listened. The audience was silent, completely absorbed, feeling the weight of each note and the emotion behind it.